Hey, everybody. This is Andrea Paquette, president and co-founder of Stigma-Free Mental Health Society. Thank you so much for joining our podcast today, Stigma-Free Voices. And I am very excited today to meet with a colleague and a good friend, Nevin Harper. Hello, Nevin. How are you doing today?
Good, Andrea. How are you? Good to see you again.
Yeah, good to see you too. And today we're going to talk about why youth mental health can't wait. And this conversation with Nevin Harper, he is the author of Kids These Days, but he's also many other things other than that. But today the real focus is his new book. So I am super excited to delve into all the good things about youth mental health, some of your perspectives, and let's have fun with it. So I'm just going to read your bio and then we'll jump into some questions. Does that sound good with you?
Sounds good to me.
Okay, perfect. So Nevin is a nature-based therapist, author, and educator based on Vancouver Island in Canada. A professor at the University of Victoria, he specializes in recreation and health education with a strong focus on outdoor and experiential approaches in therapy. With over 30 years of experience as an outdoor skills instructor, wilderness guide, youth worker, and registered clinical counselor, Nevin is an international leader in outdoor therapies. He has co-authored Nature-Based Therapy in 2019 and co-edited Outdoor Therapies in 2020, shaping the dialogue on outdoor approaches to therapy, health, and well-being. His research and practice emphasize ecological identity, resilience building, which is imperative, especially for our young people, and the transformative advantage of connecting with natural environments. His recent book, which we'll be discussing in today's episode, titled Kids These Days, is for adults to better understand and support youth mental health. So welcome, Nevin. That is quite an amazing bio. You have so many different facets to your background, and I'm so excited to talk about Kids These Days. And first, before I delve into all the questions, I was wondering, how was the experience writing this book? Because I know how difficult it is. Like, I'm trying to write my memoir, and it's been taking many, many, many years. So how was the experience of just this book for you to finish it and to write it? Like, what was that? How'd that feel?
Well, I don't know that it feels like it's ever finished, because every time you open it, even now that it's in a bound form, it still feels like there could have been more here, less there. I continue to learn about what it is that we wrote about. And so I don't know that the process for the writer is ever finished, just to give you a heads up.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh,
So
no.
there's a block, of papers stacked and bound together that goes out to the public, but the sensation of it being finished isn't there. Writing it was in many ways liberating, because doing the work that I do within the academy in higher education, it's often research that's very much constrained by getting ethics approval and then following methodologies, and then getting it into print form is a really painful process as well, with the peer review cycles. And by the time it ends up being published, you wonder whether you actually wrote it or not, or who you wrote it for. And then it doesn't get read. A lot of peer-reviewed literature sits and doesn't get read. And if it does get read and has some impact, it usually takes 8 to 10 years before you actually see that show up in practice. So we've had, I'll just throw out an example, a number of years ago, enough large-scale meta-analyses studies, big studies of studies saying physical activity is just as effective as SSRIs for mental health issues. So when you have studies like that, you go, wow, the world's going to change. There's going to be less prescriptions and more people prescribed exercise. But it doesn't happen, right? So these things take time. So to write a book to the mainstream, to aim for a book that might be on a bookshelf in an airport, that was liberating, because it's like our voice is going directly to the public. And so it was a very exciting process, but it still took 3 years from the time I started interviewing, parenting expert Dr. Gordon Neufeld, resiliency expert Dr. Michael Unger, talking to these people that I had access to through my work as an academic, and then hearing them really putting some challenging ideas forward. of things that really need to happen. And you go, yeah, as a parent, as an educator, as a therapist, as a father, like I get what they're saying, but that's not what we're doing in practice. And so
Right.
the book's, its origin story came from just simply having conversations about what is happening today, what's going on with kids these days. And
Yeah.
that kind of stuck as a working title. And we know there's other books out there by that name, but we couldn't let it go because we wrote around the idea and it just stuck.
Okay, well, let's talk about kids these days. So you describe a kids these days effect in chapter 1. So
Yeah.
what is the kids these days effect?
Anybody over the age of 18 has probably said something like this. Ah, kids these days, they're not fill in the blank. They're not as durable. They're not as resilient. They don't work as hard. They don't read enough. Like there's always a demeaning narrative about the current generation by the previous generation. And you think about, the hippies and love, child movement of the 60s. Well, those ended up becoming the most successful, wealthiest capitalists in society. That group that was being, judged and labeled for being the youngest generation and acting in a different way, maybe a disruptive way, then became very successful. And so the kids these days effect is something that we found. There's studies about it. Socrates was complaining about kids these days. Those of us in the outdoors field, we followed the work of a German educator named Kurt Hahn. He was the founder of Outward Bound programs internationally. In the 1920s, he wrote about the kids these days, like they were suffering from the effects of modern locomotion because cars and trains were going as much as 40 kilometers an hour. Kids weren't walking and running enough because they were depending on the modern technology. So this is something that we want to address and say, let's not be accused of doing the exact same thing. When we see a book that comes out, and it got a lot of attention last year, The Anxious Generation, Jonathan Haidt's book, that lays almost the entire blame of the mental health crisis of kids on social media and the cell phones. It's like, kids these days, they're all anxious. So now they've been labeled as anxious. So we tried hard to avoid falling for that effect. But we think it exists, and we think everybody understands that as a principle.
Well, that leads into the next question. Why now? Why kids these days now? Why did you bring this out?
Yeah.
How did it come about in the sense of why is this such an important topic right now?
Yeah. Probably 4 years ago, maybe 3.5 years ago, I was sitting with colleagues at a conference in a mountain village in Norway, in Tromsø. And so the lead author on this book, Will, we put his name first because he's the young and up and coming academic, and also the one who's really good with this stuff, the social media and the videos and so forth. We were having this conversation, I think, around a fire, and it was like, there is now more psychologists and therapists and social workers and people talking about mental health than ever before. There are more therapies now than ever before. There is more interest and investment in the wellness movement. There's just so much energy, time, money being put into like therapy and wellness, and yet the numbers and statistics keep going up and are higher than ever. Like there was something amiss. There's something that just didn't quite sit right. And so we started asking questions about why. First of all, why is that therapy hasn't improved in outcomes since the 1970s? There's no better outcomes now than there was 50 plus years ago. Therapy works for about 50% of the people, about 50% of the time. And that's an average. Some types of therapies work better for some people than others, but no one therapy is better than any other overall. So if that's the case and things haven't really changed and we're not doing things that much differently, why do we continue to see this rise in numbers? And so when we ask deeper questions and we talk to the experts and we dig into the literature, we find that it's mostly adults that are deciding what to measure and why. And so some of the questions that we ask in the book provoke, poke at, scratch the surface of, and dig into some of our mainstream practices that are accepted that maybe aren't actually all that good for us. So it's a provocation, and one of our endorsers we've worked with in the past because of our work in wilderness therapy and dealing with some less than ethical practices around kids being transported against their will into therapy and in involuntary therapy settings in the United States. Paris Hilton has worked in that lane for quite a bit of time now in terms of the troubled teen industry in the States, and she referred to our book as a protest book because we're pushing back and kind of pointing out some of those things that are happening. And so we think it's time for some of these things to come to light.
Yeah.
Some tough conversations, some that lots of people are talking about, but we're maybe shining some new light into the corners and saying, yeah, and this, yes, and that, and not getting so focused on any one variable. It's not just the phones. It's not bad parenting. It's not a lack of outdoor risky play. It's all of these and more, right?
Yeah, 100%. So Paris Hilton endorsed your book?
Yes, but most people think of different things when her name comes up. It depends what era you knew her, right? Like,
yeah, no, that's amazing.
Brat rich kids, other unenviable things known about her. But the fact is that she was taken against her will into a residential treatment program as a teenager.
Yeah.
And suffered at the hands of abusive behavior in those programs. And so my co-author, Will Dobud, and I have been researching wilderness therapy and also some of those practices and the outcomes that are claimed by those programs when they have involuntary clients.
Yeah.
And so we've had our names taken off some Christmas card lists, and, we've been uninvited from conferences, and there's just been things happening, but this is a level above. This is like not one industry, not one practice. This is kids and adults. And in fact, at the end of the book, we basically say this is actually a book about adults these days. Because adults create all environments in which children and youth exist. So it's hard to point to kids and say there's something wrong with those kids these days. Like there's some problem between their ears, when in fact we've created all the environments in which they exist.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. So the introduction is titled Wicked Problems. And I'm assuming you're saying youth mental health is a wicked problem. And what do you mean by this?
Yeah, and I kind of alluded to it. It's multivariable. There's a great research term, hey? So in fact, we couldn't write, these are the 12 rules to understand and better serve, youth mental health. There's no 10 steps. There's no 4 principles. The book is not written that way. It's more a question of continually be curious, be in relationship with kids and think about what their needs are, look for and include their voice, and recognize there's lots of things that people have pointed at. Jonathan Haidt wrote a long book about cell phones and social media, the anxious generation. So that's pointing to the influence of technology. We say, yeah, sure. As a parent, as an educator, it has negative influence on us. We know that doom scrolling and pornography and gaming and all those things have impact on young people and adults. And that's the thing. It's equally impactful on adults, and it's not just an anxious generation. It's having that effect across all age groups. But we won't know what it was, even if we resolve the problem. It could be social media. It could be over-identification or self-identifying diagnoses. It could be a lack of rough and tumble play when kids are young. It could be yes, and. There's a whole bunch of interventions that probably need to happen. There's lots of things that need to change. We need to work across all of these factors and not get hung up in thinking that one is causal. They're all correlated, but very few of them you can say are the cause of. And so our approach is adolescent mental health, the way the statistics are presented, and then we have questions about whether that's legitimate or not, suggests this is a very, very wicked problem. And we might be able to help it. We might be able to resolve it. But even in the end, we might not know which of the interventions worked for whom and how much.
So this is a book for adults.
It is a book for adults. It is.
Yeah, 100%.
Maybe I'll give an example, which kind of highlights how we took the expert opinion, the literature that we read, we dug into the research, and tried to then say, well, how do we address this on a scale? And what is it? What is the mental? Okay, what is the mental health crisis? What is the youth mental health crisis? You've heard this. Your lane, the world of your work, is about teens, adolescents, young people, and mental health. Now, the most commonly used assessment tool for depression and anxiety is called the PHQ-9, the Patient Health Questionnaire. 9 questions. Questions about day-to-day functioning, questions about your sleep. You're getting lots of sleep, you're getting not enough sleep. Those are great questions to get a sense of where a person's at. The problem is the adults have chosen to put a scorecard next to it and a number. And so if you score, a particular number, you're either going to be low level of maybe anxiety, moderate, or maybe a high level of anxiety, which comes with a particular dosage of medication. So the PHQ-9, unfortunately, has a couple issues. It's been studied a lot. There's like 11,000 plus studies. It has about a 65% false positive rate. So of those that score positive, up to 65% of them are not actually positive, which is problematic. That likely means that they're leaving with medication. So this is when ideas, questions on paper, something that Andrea and I are talking about, moves into the material world. Because then we're talking about introducing pharmaceuticals into the body. And we're not anti-medication, but we're asking questions on a grander scale about what is it about this measure that leads to a lowered bar for entry to a diagnosis and then medication. And then, of course, we go, what's behind this? And then we start looking at the corporate angle. And so we do dig in a little bit and look at regulatory systems, governments, corporations. 42% of those who test negative, like don't score high enough on the PHQ-9, 42% still leave with medication. And then we go, well, where did this scale come from? This scale was developed by Pfizer when they were marketing Zoloft. So there's questions there, and behind every sort of indicator, there's a story. And the narratives that we dug into just got us more and more frustrated. And
also unpopular, I bet.
Oh, yes. Oh, my God, Andrea. Well, there's questions. There's conversations that everybody's talking about, but they're not talking about with enough nuance.
Yeah, it could be very controversial that they'd be like, you're anti-medication when you're not, right? But saying, what are some options here for people who actually may not be severely depressed? Maybe it is a prescription for nature. Like, I can get that.
We dive in as much into not just diagnosis, but self-identification with a mental health issue. So I'm so OCD. I'm depressed. This notion that we live in what's almost called like planet mental health, where WebMD and social media, like there's so much information. And if you start spending too much time even just glancing at particular images, you know that the algorithm is going to start to feed you a different narrative, right? So if someone is starting to question whether or not they have depression, there is the likelihood that they're going to end up seeing information on their social media scroll or being marketed to them. Any of us can go to WebMD and diagnose ourselves as having almost anything.
Yeah.
And then to the previous example, Andrea, as soon as we end up in a psychiatrist or a doctor's office and start mentioning, again, ideas, concepts coming out of our mouth, and they're hearing them and they're then translating that into, well, it sounds like you have X.
Yeah.
And the next fearful issue that we have is that when that actually then becomes a part of one's identity. So when diagnosis becomes a part of one's self-concept and then they start owning it. Like if I get sick, I don't say I am flu. Right? If I'm sad and experiencing, a tough time in my life and I'm feeling depressed, I can say I'm feeling depressed. But feelings are they have a time, they're time bound, right? Feelings tend to go away. They come back and they go away. You treat it as something that needs an intervention or an assistance or a change of environment. the child that's living in an abusive, drug-addled home that is experiencing anxiety and ends up medicated and diagnosed as having anxiety, moves in with Auntie Andrea out in Moose Jaw. And it's a nice, beautiful home. There's lots of room. There's no alcohol and drug abuse. There's no violence in the home. There's good, solid relationship. The child's feeling better. It's suddenly, I don't need those meds anymore. Again, with support. And again, not anti-med, but the environmental change shifted across this child's experience. And then suddenly the medication's not needed. Well, then where did anxiety go? And what was it? It was potentially environmental.
Yeah, interesting. I think that's forgotten a lot of the time.
Yeah, it is. Absolutely. And so that's kind of where we went with the book is really about the adults in the room. My Substack that I started to write about the book to try to help with promoting, which became a tedious task, trying to produce 1,500 words every week. I don't know how journalists or columnists work like that. It's stressful and it's difficult, but there's a question when we have so many people that are self-identifying, becoming diagnosed, and then being treated, whether it's with therapy or through meds or recognized in the classroom. My concern, and maybe related to your work, is that when we have so much interest on mental health, where are the ones that are actually really suffering? Like, are they getting lost in here because suddenly everybody's got trauma or everybody's dealing with X? And so there's some questions there around nuance, and are we able to get to those who absolutely need our help the most?
Yeah. So you say youth are crew, not passengers. What do you mean by that?
Yeah. Again, I mentioned Kurt Hahn, Outward Bound. It's an old axiom that he used to say, and his take on it, again, this would have been in the 1920s, was that youth need to feel like they're actually needed. They cannot be just like passengers on a ship. They have to feel like they have a role that is contributing to the success of the whole, the family, the community, their school environment, to their peers. Like, they have to feel like there's a voice that they have. I mean, if you just think about the democratic process, I mean, the height of excellence in education would be where there's a pure demonstration of democracy, in that kids have a voice in everything that's happening, and that they have meaningful ways to contribute. So another way of looking at it was in talking to Dr. Martin Brokenleg, who developed the Circle of Courage model with his colleagues back in the 1990s. This was a little green book that every youth work organization in Canada, maybe the United States, I know South Africa, we worked out of it. And the Circle of Courage was based on the sense of belonging had to be there, the development of skills around, so you develop some level of mastery. Kids have to be good at something. That's where success happens, is they have to eventually become good at something. A sense of independence, and then generosity, which is giving back to the community. We researched the Search Institute out of Minnesota that worked on the asset development model. I mean, this was big in the 90s and early 2000s. They did research that in essence mapped right over top of the Circle of Courage, which was basically an Indigenous way of raising kids. Belonging, mastery, independence, and generosity. And that is where kids have a role. They can see where they're going to be. Martin used a Lakota teaching story of the buffalo. Like, if the buffalo were being attacked on the prairies by a predator, a wolf or something, the calves would be right in the middle, right? Because they're the most important to the long-term success of the herd, and then the cows are circling it because they're the next most important to the survival of the herd, and then the bulls are on the outside. And it sounds so like 1950s and patriarchal and all those things, whatever, but it's actually really, really good ecology, because the bulls are the strongest but also the least important to the survival of the herd.
Oh, interesting.
And the calves in the middle can see potentially the roles that they will hold in the future as they grow up and grow into this community. And so this idea that we need to look forward to like modern technology or modern innovative interventions, and that most of our we interviewed, I think, 12 experts in the book. Almost every one of them basically said, no, we actually need to look back, because we understand what good, healthy relationships look like. We understand what intuitive and caring parenting or caregiving for adults looks like. And we need to get back and focus on those things. One great example from Dr. Gordon Neufeld, and he took a pretty good swing at teaching social emotional learning to kids too young. When you think of parenting, parents, maybe there's children fighting and one is losing, they're not regulated. So they're quite upset and they're quite emotional. And the parent says, you go to your room and you calm down. And when you've calmed down, then we're going to talk about this. Now, I've done it. Most parents have done it. It's not to point fingers, but it's to recognize that in that moment, that child is not regulated. That child might not even have the capacity to self-regulate. So the adult needs to be with them in a caring relationship to let them have their big feelings, feel their feelings, understand what those feelings are, recognize they're in a relationship where it's safe enough for them to have those big feelings, work through it, get regulated, co-regulation. What's happening in the school system, and again, this is it's not to be pointing at teachers individually, they're doing their best, but when they have a big classroom and they've got a number of kids that maybe aren't regulating well, they're trying to introduce things like mindfulness, meditation, social emotional learning so that kids can do self-care in the classroom. But just don't teach it too young. Those are great skills to have, maybe middle school, maybe in the teen years. Teach those skills for life. Great skills. There's nothing wrong with social emotional learning. It's just that you don't teach it to 5-year-olds.
Yeah, I can see your point there.
That's not my point. Again, that was Dr. Gordon Neufeld, brilliant, elderly.
But something to really consider. Yeah.
Big. And teachers, we hope that when people read this, they're not like, social emotional learning is good for kids. I teach it all the time and it's great for kids. And we're like, yes.
That's what we offer at Stigma-Free, right?
Yes, of course. And it's not that you need to take it as an affront to the work that you do. It's just like some kids aren't ready to self-regulate.
Yeah, 100%.
And the systems, it's the uncooperative systems, like having 30, 5-year-olds in a classroom together. It's an unreasonable expectation for the adult in the room to be able to provide emotional safety and care to help kids in those emotional playgrounds, as Gordon called them, like to exercise their feelings in a way and have the ability to work through them with the caring adult, because that is actually where growth and development happens.
Okay, so you say anxiety, right? So I think a lot of people might push back on you when it comes to phones, right? So would you say anxiety is linked to phones at all? Are they causing a mental health epidemic? Can you explain that to me? Because that's a big issue for a lot of people. Yeah,
it is. And again, as a parent, as an educator, I get it. It makes sense. Like, we need to have less time with our devices. That is very, very obvious. Our biggest issue with some of the research in the last couple of years that led to a couple very, very popular books is that it's correlational. There is a strong relationship between adolescents with mental health issues and smartphone use. So what does that mean, smartphone use? It's all inclusive, right? It's not even nuanced enough to say social media, scrolling, gaming, porn, whatever. Correlational research, yes. But then to say that it's causing something is like the biggest sin in statistical research. Correlation is not causal. In fact, there's other researchers out there, Dr. Candace Odgers, University of California. She's a Canadian. Her brother played in the NHL. She actually will take any of those researchers to task, because she is one of the foremost adolescent mental health researchers out there. And her research is basically saying, yeah, it's correlational. But what we're finding when we talk to youth with mental health issues is that many of them are using it as an adaptive coping strategy. Youth with mental health issues are spending more time on screens. So it's actually the other direction.
Interesting. Yeah.
So that level of nuance, I get blowback. If I comment on a LinkedIn post that Jonathan hates, ban cell phones in schools, is writing about it, everybody's following, and everybody's like, yeah, ban them. And I'm like, Well, what about the correlational research that suggests that maybe it's in the other direction? Why are you saying this? Dumb academic in the ivory tower, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, it's a strong narrative. And we agree there's less need for cell phones in schools, but there's adaptive technology that some kids need devices to be successful in school. There's some young people that, like my kids, they got cell phones in high school because they had to communicate with their employers about what time to start their shifts after work. So there's the best language that we got was from Dr. Murray Swingle from Vancouver, the Swingle Clinic. I'm not sure if you've heard of it.
Know it well. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So Murray was saying digital interference is a thing. It is a thing. The person who, adult or otherwise, doesn't matter if they're kids, the person who scrolls too much, the person who's got addictions, digital interference. Digital integration is what 60, 70% of the population has. They use it for work. They run successful entrepreneurial businesses with it. And one example that we wrote in the book was maybe someone in their 20s, they're a video game developer. They can be playing a very, very like dopamine-addled game to understand where they need to make changes. They're working out of a cognitive part of their brain and they're analyzing it. They're still playing the game. The 13-year-old playing that exact same game is dysregulated and losing it. Very different experiences, the exact same game. So is it the device? Is it the game? Or is it where the person is at in their own development? One is digitally integrated. One is experiencing digital interference. So this universal intervention, and again, another area that we criticize, universal interventions do not work across cultures and contexts. So a cell phone ban is going to have negative consequences for a certain percentage of the population. So banning cell phones in schools is based on what? 25% of kids with mental health issues show strong correlation with cell phone and smartphone use. What about the other 75% that aren't suffering mental health issues?
Interesting.
The ban is on 100%.
Right.
So it's, again, we kind of agree. Yeah, you don't need cell phones in schools. So we kind of agree with that, but we don't agree with the baseline argument for it. And that it's probably not going to serve everybody's needs.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And again, another issue that we're taking to task in the book that most people will come back and go, interesting. Do I agree with them or not? So we didn't intend for controversy. We didn't want to sell books by being hyperbolic. We're trying to actually go down the middle. Yeah. We're trying to write the book in the messy, dirty, nuanced middle and not at the poles. It's easy to sell books out here. It's easy to get one population excited about it and one angry about it. Right? So everything that we wrote about, Andrew, we would go and say, okay, let's even go with the wings. What would the right-wing audience, like a conservative, ideologically Republican, say in the United States, how would they view that issue? A democratic, progressive, liberal-minded person, how would they view that issue? And we tried to write it in a way that both ends of the extreme ends of the poles will actually be able to say, that's interesting and I've learned something from it.
Yeah, see something in it.
Yes. Hopefully.
Yeah.
Fingers crossed.
All right, well, we've come to the end of our podcast, and I just wanted to give you an opportunity to share with our viewers where to get your book.
Okay, well, if you want to learn about the book, kidsthesedaysbook.com. So all one word, kidsthesedaysbook.com. Of course, kidsthesedays.com was taken. And if you want to buy the book, I don't want to promote the corporate entity, but if you want to sell books in this world, Amazon is the king. So if you're in Canada, amazon.ca, if you're in the States.com, if you're in Australia.au, whatever, that is where we will be able to move the needle by getting books sold, is through those places. New Society Publishers, if you want to be the diehard and support the Canadian publisher on Gabriola Island, New Society Publishers, you can get the book directly from the publisher. It all counts. I get 30 cents per book. So we don't care about the sales on this one. We want to get people talking about some of the nuance get people talking about some of the things that they haven't considered. We didn't even go into the environmental toxins chapter, Andrea, and it's worth a podcast on its own. It really is.
Yeah.
And it's terrifying how many things in our world cause behavioral, neurological, and medical health problems in humans that then can be seen and interpreted as mental health issues.
Yeah. Interesting.
And so then what we're doing is we're diagnosing, labeling, pathologizing, medicating for something that is actually truly environmental, like an environmental toxin.
Yeah.
And it's
well, maybe we'll have to
scary.
have you back.
Yeah.
I think
Happy to
it'd be
come
great
back.
to have you back. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Nevin. Please stay on the line and I can give you a formal goodbye. And thank you for everybody for watching our episode today. I hope that if you are watching this, that you can click share. We'd really like to get the word out there. It's really important that we talk about youth mental health and why it can't wait. And having this conversation, sometimes it can get controversial. Maybe sometimes it can get uncomfortable. But you know what? I think it's when we truly delve into all the different issues that we can have really amazing conversations that are meaningful. So thank you, everybody, and have a wonderful day. Take care.
Thanks.